Quickening by W. Macfarlane. They left Coscross a barrel of water and a knife with a short rounded blade for prying shellfish off the rocks and opening bivalves. It was an island small as a roof and tall as a house, with no shelter, no vegetation, and no fresh water. After the second 6 day alone, he began wetting the knife on a fine-grained rock. After a sambit, he was talking to it as his only friend. His friend helped him kill a small octavort in the crystal ocean, but in a spell of dead calm weather, when he had stopped eating and speaking, and the water in the barrel was hand-deep and green with algae, his friend drew a thin red line across his wrist, and he threw the knife tumbling into the sea. It stuttered sunset remonstrations back at him. He lay face down on the rock. He was done with friends. That night a squall dumped 2 fingers of rain on the island. It overflowed the shallow catch basins Coscross had cleaned of sand and sea wrack. It washed the salt grime from his body. It washed away the last of his hope for justice. He had been accused, betrayed, and condemned by the question framers. The electorate had voted 92.6% in favor of his death, but the answer had been implicit in the question. Should the traitor Coscross die? The men who framed the questions ruled the world. There was no recourse in direct democracy. He had been put on the island and his execution out to bid. 8 years had passed since the last time the vote had gone over 90%, when Allegran the pirate had abrogated the will of others and the skein of Janali had beggared itself with an unexampled high bid. The Janali had enlarged their amphitheater and put Allegran in an arena with an octavort. He had killed and eaten 3 before the 4th octavort had eaten him. He had lasted 3 6 days, and the ticket sales alone had covered the big price. The food concessions, the entertainment licenses, the lodgings and mementos had made the Janali affluent. It had been a worthy end for a pirate. But for a man who wanted to save the world? Coscross lay on his belly and drank the sweet water. Whoever threatened the instant expression of public desire should anticipate a skein with a population of 1. The man who holds a mirror to the incoherent beast with many heads should realize he will be condemned to single sovereignty, left to institute his own reforms and plan for a future as nebulous as that smoke on the horizon. It was not the excursion boat he expected with a cage on deck. It was an implementation ship under forced draft, the smoke streaming away in the wind, the bow waves thrown high, and the wake rolling cream green behind. It approached smartly. The boom was rigged. The ship stood off the sheer north face of the island. The net swung out, Coscross timed the surge, and was swept up like a child in a swing. The ship was under way before he had been lowered to the deck. A sailor steadied him against the pitch and roll. The deck shook under the thrust of the screw. He was led below to the central cabin. Grissongier was sitting at his ease. He was a big man with a high forehead and heavy jaw, tumbled brown curls, a voice smooth as a barrel of oil. He waved negligently to a chair and dismissed the guard. Coscross had trusted him. He trusted him now to serve his own interests. Due to an unforeseen circumstance, Coscross, the bid award is delayed. I hear the Janali are thinking in terms of an Irax an hour to be released in a caged arena, the prisoner to be awarded an hour and 12 minutes before the next, then an hour and 24, an hour and 36, and so on. Mad, vicious little beasts. And the Maureen are said to have some notion of a glass oven. The prisoner would be fed on the fungus that kills when half cooked. His voice grew contemplative. The weight of a man in the oven is required to activate the heat. Coscross felt a stinging sensation high in his nose. The chair felt infinitely luxurious after bare rocks. He was secure from the empty bowl of the sky in the cabin. The mellifluent voice was balm after the mindless mutter of the waves. His hatred was not diminished, but what a wondrous thing was man. Grissongier spoke with more emphasis. There are the usual variations of the shooting gallery, but the Tintenbar are reported to have a really ingenious notion. They propose a tracked maze down the side of the amphitheater, and the prisoner flat on a cart, his head projecting over the front. Down he goes at random, they say, along the pathways. They contemplate many resolutions to the pattern: food, a beast to fight, a maiden to bed, and perhaps, entirely at random, a very solid post. Coscross marveled at the ingenuity. Once a day, down you go through the maze. It is a most expensive idea, and has aroused great interest, but bids were sure to run high for the denigrator of democracy, the arch-deviationist, the unashamed elitist. That's you, Coscross. Why is the bid award delayed? To the heart of the matter, said Grisongere admiringly. It is simple enough. We have found a use for a devious, suspicious mind. Your observation is acute, no matter how flagrantly impolitic. Consensus democracy will not tolerate a challenge to the rule of law. Coscross was silent. He had given Grisongere his allegiance to elect him question framer of Yellowvon. Had hope been betrayed the day Grisongere had said he would implement their hopes for the future and climbed aboard the steam car for Crux? No hope betrayed. Grisongere had been true to himself. For the proposed service, we will grant you null status, no mandatory ballot, and optional voting rights. A handsome offer. Coscross rubbed a finger on the smooth edge of the table. When do you want me to stop the sun, or bag the wind? Tell me, at which end of the hairy vorticor do I stand, the teeth or the flatulence? Grisongere ignored the childish vulgarity. A ship from the stars has landed at Crux. The aliens are men. They call their home Earth. Their planet circles a sun similar to our own. How far? The answer is in terms of the distance light travels in a period measured of time. The terms are meaningless. Give them a druse to wear instead of their peculiar garments, put a cup of beer in their hands, and you could not tell them from Aurun, the common man. Coscross stared at him. Why? Of course. Why have they come, and what do they want? It may be as simple as why we travel the skeins. Why do we build bridges between them? Why run steam cars around the two rings? Why do we sail the endless ocean to the ice, searching for islands that exist only in fanciful tales? Because they are there, even when they are not. Suit your style to your idealistic audience, thought Coscross, and so encourage this image of a metaphysical cloudhead. Have they seen God in their travels? Do they have gods? As many as we. In the service of their gods, will they enslave our people and take our treasures? The answer is one of many we must find. Coscross held the table light with both hands. He was a leaf in a torrent of information, spun by the smell of food from the galley, the motion of the ship, the colors and shapes and sizes of human constructions as opposed to bare rock and sea and sky. What is my function? Grisongere rubbed his face to an expression of candid honesty. If I remember the judgment, you are an ethical imperialist, a truth-bender, a contamination to the young, and an advocate of slave-work morality. He smiled without humor. We need such a person to understand the aliens. If you refuse... This is my world. The obvious. You made me question Finder and Yellowvon. Flattery. It is better to be a live skink than a dead octavort. Meeching self-interest. Agreed. You are true to your skewed reality. Fortunately for you, it now coincides with my own, he said benevolently. You look like Aurun after a 6-day drunk. Go through that door. They'll take care of you. Coscross luxuriated in a scrub oil bath, was dressed in a rich orange blouse and darker druse, and enjoyed the skills of a barber who clucked his tongue over the neglect of man's crowning glory, and shaved his beard and curled his hair in a style he had never worn before. He was served a simple meal. He sipped a glass of distilled beer and enjoyed the volition-free state of travel, so praised by the poets. He did not believe a word of the promises made him. In the timeless zone of travel, personal danger was as hypothetical as the monsters from space in his future, or the rock in his past. What he thought about was the stranger in the barber's mirror, burned down and gaunt by the sun, and made wary by solitary confinement. There was an unfamiliar set to the jaw. The dark gold eyes smoldered. Who he was, and what changes had occurred, would be determined by his reaction to the high probability that when his usefulness was over, he would again face betrayal and death. The ship steamed discreetly into the bay at Crux the next afternoon. The fishing boats, the sea plant scows, the ferries, the green garden rafts up the river, and the swarms of houseboats were the same as ever. So was the pall of smoke, the harbor garbage, and the stink of the brown river. The men on the streets wore checkered "I have voted" patches. The crew had the old red and white stripes with the barred exemption for sailors. Coscross wore a temporary knoll with the white cross on back. He read the ballot outside the poll while Grisongir and the crew voted and got their checkered patches. Mother and Skeen questions. Should cargo boats charge one freight for Damanami Skule wood? Obviously, yes. Should the beer allotment be decreased? Obviously, no. Should land returning to Skeen control from entrepreneurs carry an increased minimum bid price? Yes, otherwise where would the money come from? All misapprehension to the people, Coscross said to himself without emotion. He turned and looked up at the ruined fortifications of the Cruxcos kings in the days before democracy. The spaceship had landed in the great courtyard. He could not see it from below. He wondered if the representative democracy he advocated could be essentially another form of tyranny. There lay the problem. One man's benevolent despotism is another man's half-cooked fungus. A labor master trooped by with his boys and girls, for once a good-looking crew, alert and well-fed. A senior mendicant with a dwarf came whining to Coscross, caught sight of his face, and sidled away. A bumpin' man blew the ash from his coals and offered to cook whatever was brought him. A dye merchant carried cerise cloth on his arm. A milkwoman with a baby on her hip bared a breast and squirted the eye of a wizened stallkeeper who screeched at her to move on. Coscross shortened his stride to walk with Grisongir through the open market to the base of the cliff. The swarms of men and women getting and spending, children underfoot, begging and eating, haggling and drinking, did not affect him as once they had. Was devotion to the public weal a sickness from which he had been cured by isolation? The elevator driver spun the wheel when the car was loaded. Water gushed from the tank into the channel until the lift rose freely, drawn up by the weight of the descending car. Grisongir and Coscross disembarked on a tableland striped with crops and salted with houses that overflowed the city on the alluvial plain. The artesian bore and tank serving the elevator had once stood inside the castle wall, now many years gone, but the inner stonework remained as testimony to the oppressive past. They walked through the zigzag entry into the paved courtyard. The starship was a flattened sphere 6 men tall and 10 wide at the beltline. It loomed over the myriads in the court milling around the base of the ship, reading the graffiti scrawled as high as a man could reach. A group of drummers lounged in the shade of a wall. A teacher huddled with a class of pre-voters. Lackadaisical women from one of the farms hawked minced fruit in half-shells. 4 steam car men were feeding 2 happy girls in country hats. A bright yellow ramp extended from a rectangular opening. A guard was ignoring a woman who insisted the ship be moved because her Corybantic band was hired into the court a 6 day from now. The lead treble drummer was picking up tempo, and the others patterned around his beat. Coscross found his heart following the treble up a beat, then faster in an incessant progression. Grisongir stopped. He unhooded his octavort eyes, flat, gray, and ruthless. Give no refusal. None at all. Coscross followed him up the ramp. The ship had been built under a far sun and not of wood, stone, or metal. The boilers had to be fantastic to move it through the thin Empyrean along an invisible track by intangible cogwheels. He abandoned all attempts to understand in the entry port. He saw a deep room illuminated by forced flame, sliced thin and fixed cold in the ceiling. The cupboard doors on either side were filled with wings for flying, gold wire in coils, filled with exotic food cured by syrup so sweet a spoonful fed a man for a day. A tiny figure moved in the wall. It opened its mouth and gibberish came out. Is this our guinea pig? Were there hordes of high-hand aliens, fanged and Irax vicious, hidden in the cupboards? The inner wall spit and each door slid away. The room beyond was large and circular. The floor was covered with rugs over a resilient carpet, and the man whose miniature had been in the wall was sitting in a chair turned to the entry. Welcome aboard. Oh, the writing instrument of my mother's sister. How's that? His legs were individually encased in cloth. He wore a short red blouse and another over it of black and white checks. He said, My name is Peter Snell, and his face became fixed forever in Coscross's mind. Question framers sat in a double arc of spindly chairs against the curved wall. The ghost of a shimmer hung across the room between the men and the three aliens. Pedantic young Dasakan tapped a slate with a wand for attention. A writing instrument, said Dasakan, is a tool for writing. Coscross sat down and gripped the chair seat. The room was thick with inexplicable devices. The commonplace was not what it seemed. Behind the starmen were windows, but each showed a different direction. The worst was the window looking down at the spaceship, the courtyard, the cliffs, and the tiny moving foreshortened people from high in the air, all fixed on a vertical, yes, a vertigo wall. Peter Snell had gray eyes and high cheeks and straw-yellow hair. His face was melancholy and mocking. It was also vital and innocent. He was clean-shaven. He turned his head, and Coscross saw a burr of gold on his cheeks. He was older than Coscross. He was younger. Coscross groaned silently. The smile on those lips could mean he was figuring ways to butcher plump young Dasakan, who was tediously explaining familial relationships with drawings on the alien board that held lines inside the glass surface. The slender starman with the dark brown hair had sleepy eyes bright as coals in a cave. He wore lazy arrogance like a Druce, and calmness like a Blas. He was a sheathed sword and quiet and bloody potential. The third man sat in a condition of arrested momentum, like an enormous stone in the middle of the air. He was bigger and broader than the other two, relaxed and inevitable as the fall of night. His face was ruddy, his hair white, his expression placid. Was he thinking of recipes? Coscross put the question to himself harshly, in a futile hope of diminishing the impact, the fascination of this contradictory trio. Peter Snell cut short mother-sister's married relationships. He said they would see a recording of Earth to complete the day's work. The windows faded to a single large picture of an unsupported ball, mottled white and blue and brown. The ball expanded until it was Earth with a harbor, with ships of sea and air and land. The buildings were gigantic, but Earthmen also had trees and green grass. They had enormous oval amphitheaters. They tamed weird monsters. They farmed to the horizons. They held back rivers. Their casual mastery of the world, the bewildering scope and variety of their activities, was presented against a background of alien music more insistent than drums. When it was over, Coscross slumped in his chair, bludgeoned by the intensity of his attention, stunned into a lassitude of shock. The slender alien was speaking. He said the danger of contact was real, and this was why they maintained the force barrier, the invisible division between themselves and the men of this world. Grisengir replied the framers understood disease and would not hold the aliens responsible if the volunteer died. They hoped he would not prove infectious. In fact, he had been living in isolation since the landing for this very reason. All eyes turned to Coscross. He stood up. He kept a properly sober face. It was lunatic comedy that Grisengir should smile as his new treachery was accepted. This was throwing an octavort into the ocean to drown. There was nothing Coscross wanted as much as to stay with the Earthmen. The question framers filed out of the spaceship. The inner entry doors closed. The shimmering barrier snapped and was gone. Peter Snell stretched and said, "Nice to have you aboard. You understand that time is needed for all things, from seed to flower, from stranger to friend, from alien menace to a comedy of understanding without alienation." "Why do you take lessons," asked Coscross slowly, "when you are fluent in our tongue?" "It's a trick," said the slender man. He yawned. "It's also common sense to give you weight, to balance your special knowledge against our own." He was not sleepy. "I'm Wild Eyes." The broad-shouldered man with the white hair sighed. "We overwhelm. There is no way our landing will not be a shock. We try to restore confidence by being less than omnipotent. My name is Brander, Charles Brander." "I am overwhelmed," said Coscross. He sat down abruptly. He knew no ritual for social conduct with starmen. He would have to be himself, whatever he had become. They waited. He said, "I have a feeling you have done this before." "Do you know?" asked Wild Eyes. Brander blinked. Peter Snell swung a chair around and straddled it. "You are the first man to make this observation on all the planets we have visited," he said pleasantly. "Why?" asked Coscross. Brander said, "Why visit other planets? A good question. Perhaps to socialize, to be neighborly, to visit relatives, and, through meeting them, to understand ourselves a little better." "Greed," said Wild Eyes. "Simple, honest need, to strive, to seek, to find, and not to yield. Who wants to be an idle king? Tennyson was a great poet in spite of himself." "Maybe we're looking for God," said Peter Snell. "We don't like to be God," said Brander. "Having tried it," said Wild Eyes. Peter Snell said, "When we were earthbound, we could anticipate marvels, intelligent arachnids or reptiles, star kings and galactic empires, talking plants and talking planets. Oh, we had the gaudiest kind of dreams. Alas, lost innocence. What we have found circling the far stars is man, and only man. We don't know why. And last and worst, we are the advanced race." "A deadly disappointment," said Brander. "This is why we keep searching," said Peter Snell. "We are looking for someone else to blame, to give us revelation, to take responsibility." "My name is Coscross." He was deeply moved. "I am pleased beyond saying to be with you." It was ridiculous to think that truth was freedom, but anything less than the available truth became incentive to it. He did not entirely believe the Earthmen, but whatever they wanted here, their preoccupations were of the same order as his own. "Then let's eat dinner," said Wild Eyes. "Come on, Coscross. Kitchen and bedrooms are upstairs. All the machinery is downstairs. This is where we work. Let's go, Peter, damn it. Philosophy is tolerable only with a full belly." Coscross followed through a door and up perfectly ordinary stairs. If the strangers had consciously set him at ease, what else should they do? If they were more or less than they seemed, what man is not? He could deal with them. He walked into the upstairs room with modest confidence. It was filled with women. Peter Snell introduced Marianne and Jen and Camilla and Faye and Barbara. They wore brighter colors than the men and far less clothing. Women had appeared in the picture of Earth, but they had been no more real to Coscross than the ships of air or the incredible buildings. If women existed in fact, then Earth must exist in reality. He stood bemused. Brander saw his difficulty and took him to an ablutions room. He explained the mechanisms, challenged Coscross to wash his hands, and patiently explained again. The meal was bright red lips, bold eyes, and silky hair, and the confused realization that women were peers among Earthmen. They dressed, or were undressed, shamelessly or shamefully, and exposed their navels without qualm. They calmly exposed 6 bare toes on each bare foot. They spoke to him freely, and they were kind to him. Their kindest act was pouring half a tumbler full of whiskey and putting him to bed in one of the bed closets around the room. "He is emotionally exhausted," said Brander. "Sleep well, Coscross. You have journeyed to Earth today, and that's enough to tire any man." The next 6 days were forever jumbled. Coscross thought it was because he could not distinguish relative values, and all the things he learned were of indeterminable consequence. He did not forget the real world. His belief that death awaited him settled his mind and concentrated his attention. The Earthmen gave him the English language in direct imprints under a helmet. His understanding surprised them. "On some other worlds," said sturdy Marianne, "the cultural lock made hearing impossible." "How could you learn my tongue so fast?" he asked. Plain Jen said, "Computer analysis and rationalization, plus a long history of trying to be culture-free, which is impossible." "And the quick imprint," said Faye, plump and smiling. "We also try to understand the common denominators." Camilla said, "All men eat, drink, and snore." "It beguiles the observant mind," said languid Barbara, "that on every world the old trinity rules or death results: identity, variety, and security." Coscross shook his head. "I will never understand." They protested, but he meant he did not expect to be allowed time for understanding. He soaked up information like a child. He was shown the drive engines where a small sun was entrapped. He saw the microfiche files and the retriever, which supplied data on a molecular level to the manufactory. To please him, Brander programmed a writing instrument, and it was spun, it took place, it happened together, it was made before his eyes. It was a light negation pen that unreflected light on any surface. The gadgetry was only technological wonder. It was the friendship and trust, the courtesy and thoughtfulness the Earthmen showed to him and to each other that amazed Coscross. They had no meanness of spirit. They quarreled and laughed and argued together in amity. He found this sadly suspicious. The language lessons progressed in the room below. The question framers slowly came to regard the Earthmen as lucky relatives who had struck it rich. It seemed possible, then reasonable, then only right, that they should share the wealth. Coscross watched the screens in the room above. At first he was shamed by the framers' transparent interest in changing lead to gold, but when he saw the oblique encouragement the Earthmen offered, he forgot apologies. The framers were especially charmed by a magic fluid that occurs when certain particular requirements are met, to provide illumination or heating or turning wheels or saying yes, no, 1,000,000 times in the time it takes a man to breathe, and thereby solving any problem. If electricity were man's right and heritage, then they should be given it. As they learned more of Earth, the framers grew eloquent in favor of advanced weaponry, air cars, medicine, mountains of food, and immortality. Coscross listened with growing disquiet. Peter Snell said that Earthmen had learned these things, but not immortality, through a sharp discipline called science, a system of looking at the world so cutting that most men took the benefits and deplored the method. Wild Eyes said science was a faith, just as mathematics was a hypothesis that 3 + 3 = 6. Brander said it was obvious they had landed on a paradisical planet. The 2 long loops of islands in the Green Sea, joined by the steam car bridges, were unique and delightful. He thought this world should follow its own course and refuse any gift. Peter Snell was persuaded to admit the Earthmen had made gifts in the past, but it was always a universal gift. It must go to every man, woman, and child on the world, for the common good. This is impossible. "Not so," shouted the framers. It was the obligation of every man to vote every 6th day. This was the 1,000-year-old method of direct democracy, made possible for the entire world by the steam cars. Certainly every individual could receive a gift. What was it? The common good has not yet been determined, said Peter Snell, and he would say no more. Why are you so silent? Asked Camilla. I was wondering what you can give, said Coscross, that will not accrete to a smart and greedy man in a sambit. Moonlight, she said promptly. A world called Cor Caroli 38 was in so sluggish a time referent, we gave it a moon. She was lithe and brown and supple. The idea of her reaching out through a window and pushing a moon around a world was not funny after all. Why give anything? So we are not forgotten, she said, but this was the same sort of limited answer as moonlight for Cor Caroli 38, because moonlight is not all that moons give worlds. Coscross said, I am proud of our achievements, the unification of mankind, the growth of equity in government along with the engineering skill to make it possible. At first there were boats, then little walkways, and then stone bridges between the near islands. When it was time for pile driving, steam-driven piles linked the skeins. The evolution of high-speed steam cars with the knee-high wall in the center for directional stability and the smooth flanges on either side made the will of the people manifest in a 6-day. All this occurred in the incredibly short space of 1,000 years. Who knows what the future holds? Do you? Yes, said Camilla. She had drawn a thin line of red just above and below her eyelashes. The demand outgrows the resources. The result is chaos and retrogression. A new balance is struck at a subsistence level of achievement. It is not an immutable law, said Marianne, but there is a time imperative for society, just as the unstimulated child will not achieve optimum. We have no fixed obligation, said Jen. Do you think we should go away and forget your world? Or do we have some responsibility? Asked Faye. I don't know, said Coscross. Then we must do the best we can, said Camilla. Coscross had been sure of many things before he was convicted of treason, but exposure on the island and exposure to the Earthmen had shaken his certainties. They were not arrogant or self-righteous, but their undisclosed intention and their refusal to consider serious matters with due sobriety filled him with misgivings. They were hoodwinking the framers into accepting a gift. Whatever it would be, he had the queasy feeling it would be for good. A morally loaded gift is always suspect. It was instant voting. Peter Snell made the offer. The Earthmen would supply talking bracelets to all. Then every man and woman could push yes or no on the bracelet. The response would be sent by magic to a central repository and tallied. Wild Eyes passed out bracelets to the question framers. Is the sun shining today? He asked. A box tall as a man showed the words on a screen. Yes, 52. No, 9. Peter Snell explained again, and the yes vote rose to 61. Dassican protested that there was no assurance that everyone would vote. Brander told him to abstain and asked, Are question framers intelligent? The yes vote was 60, the no vote 0, and 1 abstention was noted. Brander tapped the box and a number showed on the screen, the same as that of Dassican's bracelet. The matter of enfranchising women was bitterly opposed. It was resolved only when Peter Snell agreed the screen should show male and female voting. He was adamant in his insistence that every woman should have a bracelet as well as every man. Finally, Grissinger stood beside the box and asked, Should we accept the gift of the Earthmen? The vote was unanimously in favor. Grissinger said it was evident from the disappearance of the force barrier that hands across the stars were not infectious, and their volunteers should be returned. Camilla said soberly, Stay with us. Wild Eyes appeared at the top of the stairs. It is your choice, Coscross. Where does loyalty lie? He was numb with decision. I must go. He turned blindly and stumbled down the stairs. He wanted with his whole heart to say, but he understood the peril of the gift. He foresaw the destruction of his world. He had no illusions about his probable success in persuading the framers to his viewpoint, but he had no option. He had to walk into the dull, mumbling jaws of futile endeavor. He said goodbye to Peter Snell and Brander and followed Grisongir down the yellow alumina-fibered ramp. The afternoon sun washed the old castle walls to painted scenery. He walked with the question framers through the swarming men and women. The crowd stank. He reminded himself, as he had so often before, that he was obligated to people and not disembodied ideas, that he must be wary of humanity and large issues in order not to become a tyrant himself. He had made his choice. He wondered if the memory of his time in the spaceship would ache forever. He wrenched his thoughts back to the old problem of how gratifying it was to be concerned with abstractions about mankind and to forget actual men and women. They went down the elevator and through the streets into the central district, past the steam car terminus and the implementation barracks, to the hollow square where the question framers lived. Concordance Hall was at one end, along with clerical and bureaucratic support offices. "I must give you a warning," said Coscross. "Come into the anteroom," said Grisongir. "You know my mistrust of direct democracy and instant laws." "Which got you condemned to death." "I implore your attention. Instant voting will be far worse. There will be no time cushion, no time for modifying thought, no time for—" "You want to modify the will of the people." "It takes time for all things." "It is time to vote for the purest democracy. This meeting will make official the vote aboard the ship. We will frame the question, shall we accept the beneficent gift of the visitors? It will be put out for vote on the steam cars tomorrow morning. No more nonsense from you. Wait here. I want your secret report on the monsters." "You fool! Instant response means destruction." Grisongir shook off Coscross's hand. His eyes were opaque. "I see it is time to reconsider your status." He went out and slammed the door behind him. Coscross opened it immediately. Grisongir was cutting across the flow of the framers to the implementary station. Coscross moved with the crowd. He glanced back and saw a guard take position in front of the door. He walked briskly along the outer wall and out the back stairs. He had no food, no friends, and no money, but he was his own man for the first time in more than 3 sambits. He walked at his own pace toward the estuary. Knoll patches were less uncommon there, and the brewery was famous. He idled along the docks, watched the labor crews finish work. They piled the last baskets of skule wood and up kindling into the carts. The skule was even smaller in diameter than it had been. Instant voting would reduce the pressure on the supply. Earthmen had used petroleum. None was available here. Concentrated energy was growing short. Camilla had been serious. Why should the thought dry his mouth? He entered a tavern displaying the brewery logo, a cloud of steam riven by a lightning bolt of discovery, and tore a beer privilege slip from the back of his patch. The proprietor was sympathetic when Coscross said he had forgotten his purse, and slipped him a flatbread wrapped around a piece of fish for another beer slip. He returned to the estuary in the gathering dusk, found a watchman, and had him load a barrel of fish oil onto a boat that was broad beam and light draught. A single gaff sail was rigged without a boom. Coscross told the watchman the skipper was drunker than Auren. The watchman said he wished he were, lit the lantern on the stern pole, and cast off the mooring lines. A Knoll badge worn with audacity had real advantages. Coscross was out of the harbor traffic by moons up, thanks to the favoring wind and quiet sea. The wherry had a low freeboard and belonged on the river or in the harbor, but it was loaded with bundles of up and was a safe enough coastal craft. Coscross sailed half the night before he saw the waves on the causeway to Elora, a straight line of pale breakers. The steam car bridge crossed the deeper water on the pilings. He tied the wherry 4 boat lengths from the Aloran shore 2 hours before sunrise. It was not too late to change his mind. He gripped the tiller until his fingers hurt, trying to squeeze understanding from apprehension. Were the Earthmen guilty of malicious mischief? How could men of good will sponsor disaster? Democracy is responsibility, and Auren will always make beer from grain and worry about flatbread later. Society is based on restraint. Without restraint, anything is immediately possible. Drowning every other person would leave more for the others. Solution unacceptable. He groaned and looked at the loom of the land in the night. Elora was a spiny island twice as long as Crux was wide, a skein with a small population and scant resources. The north ring began at Elora, the south at Crux. Here was the single bridge north, and here he could buy the most time. The vote could not be quickly ratified until the steam car line was repaired. Buy time for what? Second thoughts? Rebellion? Who will rebel against immediate gain? He knocked in the barrelhead and poured oil on the Arardup. It was still not too late. He could change his mind. He could return to the spaceship. Let the world take care of itself. Who was he to read the future and find disaster in instant democracy? He swung the bobbing stern lantern inboard. If the Earthmen were dedicated to long-term good, it was presently cold comfort. Maybe he was wrong, maybe he was not. He smashed the lantern into the cargo. He swam ashore because he had been wrong. He should have set the fire from the bridge. The Arardup caught from the flaming oil and volatilized into a burgeoning flower of fire. He dove into the black water. He pulled himself onto the rocks and was aghast at the intensity of the blaze. The flame gouted high over the bridge. He crouched to avoid the searing heat. The piers were burning, so was the cribbing, and so was the bolted wooden track. He climbed to a cart road and loped along the shore. He heard voices ahead and hid in the dark, while men and boys passed him toward the glow in the sky. He turned downhill to a sheltered bay, avoided the houses, and found a skiff pulled up on the sand. He rowed to an anchored fishing boat, sharp at both ends, and sailed out of the bay on the light wind running ahead of dawn. The boat had provisions and water. He coasted well offshore for the day and night, and at mid-morning he saw the hills of Katai, the first skein of the eastern loop. He went ashore at twilight to refill his water cask at the root of a sharp ravine. The steam car trestle crossed above. There was a rusty universal wrench aboard the boat, and he spent that night removing bolts from the trestle track. He sailed at dawn and rounded the tip of Katai before noon. Bridges marched to the horizon over a chain of low islands. He fished the inner sea until night fell, then set out for the western skeins. He was becalmed in the morning. The sail did not stir for 3 days. He chewed the fish he caught to supplement his water. The inner ocean was glassy. He fell into a condition of somnambulant contemplation. And when the wind stirred again, old facts had assumed new relationships. The spaceship had to be old. The main fabric showed signs of age and repair, though individual parts were new. The folding chairs for the framers were sparkling new. The rugs covering the carpet could have been made on his own world. The food was exotic, but he was sure it was not Earth food, because the words were not in the English language. The bed closets were more than individually different. The sand orange of Brander's, the lines of green on green of Barbara's, wild eyes' aqueous blue-gray, phase overlapping white scales. Of course the ship had visited on many worlds. How long did it take to wear a hollow along the alumina fiber ramp? Men and women on Earth had 5 fingers to a hand, and everyone else had 6. Other pictures showed 1 navel per person. They had peculiar skin shades. They might go through color phases. And the star crew could have been chosen from a single variant race. More women than men? Strange worlds surely presented strange dangers. English as a common tongue? Because of its wealth? Or because each crew member spoke a different native language? The Starmen were not Earthmen. Coscross landed on Dara, replenished his water, and lodged a timber across the track in a tunnel. He stole food from an implementation kitchen and was nearly caught. He sailed north again. Between Karilpa and Nargan, he sawed through a flange and filled the kerf with sawdust and fish oil. He undermined a boulder and rolled it through a concrete track section where the graded way cut a side hill on Weranalin. He was always tired. The demands of his self-imposed task shut out fruitless speculation about aliens. He escaped capture by a 10-oar boat only because a fog bank gave him shelter. He turned east and sailed across the widest part of the inner sea, careless from short sleep and food. He was caught in a storm and driven ashore on Damanami. Surf smashed the board to firewood on an open beach. He hobbled half a day through salt grass and swamp. The purple bruise on his thigh seeped blood, but the gash from his jaw hinge to temple was shallow. It opened again when he stumbled at the door of a basket-maker's hut and thumped his head on a worn chopping block. The bed on which he woke was covered with rushes over a wooden frame. His arms and legs were tied with withes to the corner of the bed. An old woman was weaving a split saltgrass basket. "Water," he said, and she paid no attention. His throat was tight fire. His mouth was swollen shut. "Water," he croaked. "So shrivel up," she said. He tried to speak again and got the dry heaves. "Choke, renegade," said Grandma. He contracted his body in fury. The bindings held, but the old bed did not. It collapsed, and he lurched to his feet. He swung the headframe into the air. "Cut my feet loose, Mother!" Free of the bindings, he rinsed his mouth and drank sparingly. "My boat was wrecked. Druce and badge ripped off. Why renegade?" For an answer, she held up her left arm. A broad band circled her thin wrist. It conformed to the bones and tendons, except for a rectangular section thicker than the rest. One edge of the rectangle was straight and white, the other wavy and black. The surface was washed with colors that changed as Coscross stared. "Give it to me." "Can't cut it. Won't come off." "What if I cut your arm?" "It defranges," she said triumphantly. "That means it bursts into powder. Been hiding a sambat, huh?" "Where'd you get it?" "At the poles. You push your hands in a box. If you got a stump, you push it in too. You got no arms, you go to Damanami and they put it on your ankle. You be a basket case, they stick it on your neck. You got no neck, renegade, you don't need one." "What about gnolls?" "They don't send implementers after you is all." "I thought the steam cars were down." "Not enough to stop the vote. Should we accept the Ben Iffy sent gift from the stars? 99.7 yes. The starmen carried the boxes all over, in the comfort and convenience of your own home, renegade. No more miserable walk every 6th day. No more fines when you're sick or—" "Attention," said the bracelet. "Yes, sir," said the old woman. "I'm here. I'm listening." "Your question framers ask the will of the people. The question is, should the steam car crossing at Bablara be elevated for the common good?" "Dearie me, yes." She pushed the white edge. "Where's Bablara?" The bracelet spelled out, "Thank you. You have voted." Then it added, "The answer is 86.4% yes. 88% and gaining. Remember, you have 1 hour to respond before your order is delinquent. There is one more question framed for today, to be answered 1 hour from now. Should the skein of Tintenbar be allowed to increase the reward for the capture of the traitor Coscross? Such reward to be an effective addition to the bid price. I will repeat the question." "Where's your old man?" said Coscross. "He died." "2 dirty bowls. That Druce on the peg." He took her throat in both hands. "Gone to town," she said. "They don't pay much for renegades. but we need every little bit we can get." He dropped her onto the remains of the bed. She glared up at him. He put on the druce. "I'll bounce a rock off your head if you stick it outside." He ran to the swamp, and when he was hidden from the hut, circled back to the footpath. He found he was on an island of firm ground. A rotten log made a bridge over the last of the swamp. The path crossed into leafy, third-growth skule. He crossed the log and entered the bosky forest. He heard the old woman grunt and turned in time to catch a billet of skule at the base of his skull. Words faded in and out. I'm here! I'm here! Pay money for Coscross! Yes, yes, yes!" His head swelled and diminished. His eyes focused and faded. She had dragged him between two trees, tied his feet together around one and his arms behind him to another. She was happily weaving more peeled bark into rope and had knitted him into the greenery by the time two implementers and her husband came down the trail. They cut him loose, hobbled his legs, and walked him to the village. "Without exception," said the implementor, and forced his hands into the alien box. The babble of the bracelet drove his ignominious failure through his head like a bolt. He was hauled in a cage on a cart to the steam car station. Grandma went along for her reward. She amused the guards, and they pointed out places of interest on the trip. They showed her the scarred hill where the starship had settled to manufacture bracelets and boxes from rock and seawater. Coscross's bracelet crepitated with black on purple. The guards flashed stalwart green. Grandma's blipped scarlet and orange with avaricious joy. Grisongir's bracelet was malicious yellow when he stared through the bars at Crux, spat, and turned away. The amphitheater was being enlarged when Coscross was put into a handsome new cage at Tintinbar. Admission to view the rebel was to the floor only. Interest was so great that guards cleared the arena twice a day before feeding time, and if the public wanted to view the mad arsonist at his food, another admission was charged. An enterprising potter cast souvenir mementos of the infamous Coscross meeting his possible fates. Old-fashioned paper votes were sold to choose the most beautiful maiden. A company of fishermen brought in a record vortvert with 12 legs to be kept in a shallow tank until needed. The opening ceremonies were well worth the doubled admission price. The amphitheater overflowed. The notorious Coscross was paraded around the arena, and everyone got a good view of his evil features. He was shown the several stalls, 3 on either side of a tall striped post with banners on top. When the track debouched at the post, his head would be driven into his shoulders. One stall held the maiden, another a pair of snarling iraks on light chains. The third was filled with bladders of excrement. In the stall beyond the post stood a man with a whip. Next came a stall of bite grass with serrated edges. The last held a cook and his coals plus succulent viands. One of the stalls would be changed every day. The trip device on the bottom of the cart automatically released the prisoner from his bindings in every stall, but not at the post. The switches in the maze were controlled by the weight of water and windmill-driven cams, entirely at random. Betting was scheme-controlled. Get your program here. Watch out for cut purses. A fine show. Coscross stood on the cart, his hands locked to a waist-high bar. Dignitaries were introduced. They took their places at the rope. To a ceremonial flourish of drums, they pulled the cart up the amphitheater slope. At the top, the hook was disengaged, and a nimble-footed boy dragged it down to the arena, the pulley whirring, to be ready for the next day's ride. The cart was trundled to the launching platform. A pin was pulled, and the bar swung forward, locking the prisoner prone, his chin on a rest. "Do you have any last words?" asked the ceremony framer. Coscross raised his head and shouted, "Beware the question framers!" But the roar of the crowd drowned his voice. The ceremony framer pulled the long lever, and the cart rolled down the incline. It switched left as the drums beat, was masked by potted trees, zagged right, and burst into full view through a sheet of water falling down the artificial mountain. It slowed on a rise and stopped on a turntable. It chose one of 7 tracks and eased down a tunnel. It burst into view, rocketing diagonally across the slope. It turned on a banked curve near the bottom, spent momentum up the hill, and came to rest on an elevator that took it nearly to the top again. Off and around, it ran directly for the post, spun on a pivot, turned right, and ran gently toward the Iraq's stall. The crowd broke into spontaneous applause. It was the finest execution ever devised. History was in the making, and there would be days and 6 days of this delightful celebration. Silent as a cloud, the pale gray spaceship settled onto the Iraq's stall. The door opened, the yellow ramp extended. The car ran into the entry port, and the ship lifted. The empty cart fell tumbling through the air and hit the bladders. The maiden shrieked. The ramp sucked in, and the door shut. The crowd screamed rage. The spaceship lifted, twinkled, dissolved, and was lost in the sky. "What took you so long?" said Coscross. He was dizzy and belligerent. He had given up friends when a friend tried to kill him, and here he was again, trusting people. The starmen surrounded him. Peter Snell, Marianne, Wild Eyes, Jen, Fay, Brander, Barbara, and Camilla, and Camilla, and Camilla. She had drawn a tawny dot in the middle of each navel. He sighed, looked up to meet her laughing eyes, and was overwhelmed by a different sort of dizziness. "You had to find out for yourself," said Peter Snell. "You're not Earthmen," he blurted. Camilla said, "Told you he was smart." "We're each from a different world," said Brander. "Replacing Earthmen who died long and long ago," said Fay, "taking their jobs and their names." "Honor and continuity," said Marianne. The skein of Tintenbar shrank in the screen. The other islands drew in from the edges until Coscross could see the whole double loop cast in the sea, blurred by clouds. The picture stayed as the spaceship followed the world's rotation at a constant height. Coscross cleared his throat. "And now?" "Now you make a choice for your world," said Peter Snell. Just as he had seen them the first time, they were the contradictory people again. They were joy and sorrow, challenge and resignation. They were the reason and emotion inextricably mixed. They were men and women, mankind. "It has to do with time," said Coscross. "The real Earthmen. How long to make steam cars?" Peter Snell understood. "From a stationary steam pump built to lift water to an engine that lifted men to their single moon, 160 plus some years, not 4 lifetimes. It took them less than 2 lifetimes more to build this ship." "The impetus must run ahead of resource use," said Fay. "Otherwise we crest and falter and fail," said Barbara. "How did Earth make it?" "To the stars," said Jen, "raging at the finish line, choking and screaming, running through the forest, butting down trees, mad, bloated, horrid, and triumphant." "What is the choice I must make?" Peter Snell said, "Keep in mind that the bracelets should interrupt the long downhill slope. The curve will break sharply, and in reaction surge up and high." "The tempo will be changed for all who live," said Camilla. "The bracelets are subtle things," said Wild Eyes. "They communicate, reflect emotion, and they defrange at death." His eyes were hard and compassionate. "Or they can be ordered to defrange and cause death." "Too many people? Drown half the population. Or only 1 out of 3. More food, more houses, more fuel for the rest. And how many would survive instant democracy? Kindly kill them now instead of letting them starve?" He was suddenly sick with responsibility. "What is good?" "We don't know." "No," said Coscross. He looked at them all. "We've done enough. No." Camilla said gently, "Each of us made the same choice." "And the Earthmen?" "The most advanced race. They never made that decision for another world. We follow their pattern." The screen showed the floating ice of Coscross's world. They were leaving. The infinity symbol of English notation was fading into the bright mottled ball, floating serenely in black and star-pricked space. To save Earth, they defragged 2 out of 3. Coscross shuddered. All we can do is the best we can do, he said. He was not satisfied. The vaulting spirit, the use of power, passion, and impassion, all came to a dull and blazing irreducible. Keep trying, he said, and joined the crew.